Well, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, welcome to the Climate Pod.
Thank you, Ty. Good to be with you.
Well, back in October, during the confirmation hearing of Judge Amy Coney Barrett, you gave a presentation on how dark money was playing a role in the Supreme Court nomination process. Can you just take us back to that moment? What were you hoping to accomplish?
This is a very surreptitious effort on the part of the big dark money funders. And the thing I most wanted to accomplish was to shed some daylight on it, because we as Democrats have actually kind of let them get away with murder for a long time without focusing on the mischief that they've been up to. You know, we get engaged when we see somebody we don't like being shoved through the Senate as a Supreme Court justice with a lot of deliberate political wreckage taking place to get that person in place. But we got to step back and look at why that's happening. And that's what I wanted to do, was to get the word out. I gave actually fairly similar presentation during the Kavanaugh hearings, but for reasons that you guys probably understand better than I do, that one did not go viral. This one did go viral. There's no way to predict what goes viral, it looks like.
Well, this dark money that's being raised by nonprofit organizations that don't have to disclose their donors, it's going to candidates and it's really changing entire elections. What
Yep.
concerns you the most about the influence this dark money is having on policy and politics in 2021?
Climate without a doubt. If you look at the trajectory of all of this, there was always kind of a wacky climate denial operation floating around the fringes. But when the tobacco industry's fraud program was shut down and they had to stop lying about the safety of smoking and of tobacco, that left a whole bunch of organizations and a whole bunch of individuals with nothing to do. And the timing was just right as we had the first hearings in the Senate on climate change and people started to get concerned about it. We even had President Bush talking about needing to do something. So that infrastructure of denial that the tobacco industry had bought got repurposed over to climate denial. In some cases, same organizations, in some cases, same people. And the fossil fuel industry, with its immense resources, just blew it out as well. They didn't take the resource and just repurpose it. They took it, they repurposed it, and they expanded it dramatically. And that has been the heart of our failure on climate change. Until Citizens United allowed them to weaponize unlimited funding, bipartisanship was the way we were going on climate legislation. In 07, 08, 09, when I first got to the Senate, there were bipartisan bills everywhere on climate. There were 4 in the Senate alone, and McCain ran for Republican president as a climate hawk. And then comes Citizens United, January, boom of 10, and it's over. And not one Republican has gotten on one serious climate bill since, because what the fossil fuel industry was able to threaten people who crossed them with had become so lethal that it was frightening. And at the same time, they could also offer Republican Party leadership like Mitch McConnell unlimited money. So we had people, write $10, $20 million checks against Democratic candidates for the Senate, and there was nothing we could do about it. We didn't know who they were. And they were coming in way early in the races, like the May before the election. So this was a very powerful political pressure operation, come covert operation. And the more people understand what is behind our failure on climate change, I think the better a position we're in to actually do something positive. So I focus not only on the court capture piece of their effort, but also very heavily on the climate denial and obstruction piece.
Yeah, do you think that this corporate funding, this dark money, do you think that it is the number one cause of our inability to transition away from fossil fuels, or to do so in an adequate and quick enough time frame?
Yeah, as to Congress, I absolutely do, and nothing else is a very close second.
So I'm curious about the solutions. What do we need in order to be able to curb or end the influence of dark money in politics?
Transparency. It's really as simple as that. And I think if you can provide transparency, then a lot of the dark money actually just goes away. I think that if you're a candidate and Exxon has to identify itself as the entity
Mhm.
that's spending $2 million against you in your race, you could actually take that and turn it to your advantage. You could say, I'm the guy who's standing up against Exxon. Or everybody who's a voter would just get the joke that this is a company that is having a fight with you and is trying to push you out of office because you're not doing what they want. And then the voters understand that, and that's a good thing for you. Even if you don't turn it to your advantage, it's at least really diminished in its harmful effects. When that same $10 million or whatever it is comes bombing in on you, and it comes from a front group called, Americans for Peace and Puppies and Prosperity, then citizens don't know what's going on. They just know that horrible things are being said about you. And it's much more difficult to deal with. So I think that if you make it apparent who really is behind the spending, a lot of the spenders just say, okay, it's not worth my trouble. If I can't hide behind a front group, I don't want to take the hit for how badly I'm behaving here. I'm going to clean up my act.
Well, that transparency requires legislation. I know you and Congressman
Yeah,
David
it
Cicilline.
does, Brock.
I know you recently led 197 colleagues in both the houses of Congress to introduce the Disclose Act. So, what would that bill accomplish?
That bill requires that anybody who is spending more than $10,000 in an election disclose who they are. So the average donor who gives $50 and then another 50 and then another 100 to the candidate they love, no effect on them. If it's your nephew who's running and your nephew can wheedle $2,000 out of you, okay, you write your $2,000 checks, but that's it. And you wouldn't be affected at all by this. This is for the professional donor class that is using donations in order to influence policy. And so $10,000, I think, is a good break point where you have to start to disclose this. And then the other thing the bill does is it makes it really clear that you've got to follow your way through the various screens. So we have found situations in which somebody gives money to a front group, a shell corporation, which then gives it to Donors Trust, which is an identity laundering operation. It comes out the end of Donors Trust as a Donors Trust contribution, which means nothing. And then it goes to a 501c3, which doesn't have to disclose its donors. So they've stacked up multiple layers of hiding. And our bill is designed to penetrate through all those layers. I don't care if there's 2 or 3 or 10 Russian nesting dolls, we will get to the middle and find who's there.
It's going to come to no surprise to our listeners that we're huge fans of the For the People Act. And I know your office noted that a version of the Disclose Act is slated for inclusion in the Senate Democrats For the People Act. As a progressive who wants to see real change in our approach to climate change, healthcare, the economy, everything, how important is that For the People Act and making the progressive agenda a reality?
It's fundamental. The situation we have right now in this country, as I see it, is that we have a very small group of industrialist billionaires who have used their vast wealth to set up basically a political party that is parallel to, but better than, stronger than, has more voter data on it than the Republican Party itself does. And through this array of front groups that they have operating, they pour money by the tens of millions of dollars into political races. And they have more or less taken over the Republican Party. And that makes it very difficult to get anything done on climate. I think if you had transparency, it would take a while for people to look around and say, oh, I can actually come out of my hole now. It's safe up there. But I think that would happen fairly soon, and we would be back to where we were before Citizens United, in which you had all these bipartisan climate bills, and people talked about it as a serious issue rather than something that they have to like whisper in my ear, because if anybody hears them saying it, they'll get in trouble. I had one of my colleagues say, let's keep talking about climate change. It's really important, but we just have to talk privately, because if my staff finds out I'm talking to you, they'll, then I'll get in all sorts of trouble.
Wow. Well, do you think this is a funding transparency problem or just a money and politics problem overall?
It's a combination of both. It's a money and politics problem. I think Citizens United was disgustingly badly decided, and there should be limits on what you can donate in politics. But it does get much, much worse when you can hide who you are when you're doing it, because citizens then don't understand the story of what is going on. People don't actually see why it is that no Republican will get on a climate bill. It just looks kind of, oh, maybe this is partisanship. Well, no, no, this looks like partisanship, but there's a very, very big hand in that glove that is driving that behavior. And I think that really makes it toxic. The unlimited spending makes it unbalanced, because it only allows a small group of folks who have enough money to take advantage of unlimited spending and a motive to do it. That little quadrant gets helped, and that's unbalancing and wrong. But then when you allow them to hide that they're doing it and set up this whole array of phony front groups, that's even worse. That is a toxic situation, not just an unbalanced situation.
What influence do you think corporate funding has had on our politics, maybe outside of just the elected officials?
A lot of what these operations do is to run public relations campaigns and try to get a narrative out about something that may or may not be true, but is helpful to the funder. And so the toxicity of the dark money stuff isn't just its effect on politics, it's also its effect on the public, on citizens, because they're seeing all this nonsense. They're being told flat out lies, but they're being told flat out lies by a group that kind of sounds like, kind of looks like it might be a legitimate scientific group. It has people who kind of sound like, kind of look like real scientists behind it. And if you can't draw the web of connections back to the common funder, then it operates out there with much more impunity and effect than if everybody could tell right off the bat, oh yeah, that's basically Exxon and Marathon Petroleum and the Cokes. I get it. That goes into this box. And I know that it's a bunch of, special interest nonsense.
Yeah, I know a press release from your office even cited the influence of dark money and backing groups that were involved in the Capitol riot. So that toxicity you're talking about can infiltrate in every aspect of our life, right?
Yep, it infiltrates very deeply. And back to where we began, it infiltrates the Supreme Court, in that dark money funded groups were given under Trump the turnstile to control for judicial nominees. They paid for the huge ad campaigns for the controversial nominees, run just like political campaigns, but with no disclosure. And once they got them on the bench, they pay for a whole flotilla. Actually, flotilla is probably too small, a whole armada of phony front groups that they send in front of the Supreme Court in squadrons of 10 or 12 to all say more or less the same thing to the Supreme Court, and create the impression that there's this widespread array of real opinion that truly thinks that X, Y, and Z is where the Supreme Court should go, rather than everybody knowing, actually in some cases that's even a party in the case funding it, but very often it's one of these big political front groups behind their array of little amici curiae, they call them, friends of the court.
Well, as a senator, you've done so much to promote climate and environmental awareness and issues. A policy that you've recently advocated for is a fee on methane emissions. So,
Yep.
Why do you think a fee on methane emissions is so necessary?
Well, from a science point of view, from a physics point of view, and from a chemistry point of view, released methane into the atmosphere is an extraordinarily powerful greenhouse gas, way more powerful than carbon dioxide. When you burn it at the burner tip, well, then it turns into carbon dioxide, and those two become more equivalent. But when it's leaking out of pipes, when it's being vented from wells, in those circumstances, the pure methane unburned is getting up into the atmosphere, and it is doing far, far, far more damage than the equivalent amount of carbon dioxide. So getting after the industry to stop that leakage is important. But for them, as long as it's free to let the stuff leak, then why would they bother to spend a nickel to stop it from leaking? So the important thing here, I think, is that you put a hell of a price on emitted carbon, and now suddenly their business proposition just changed. It's not free to pollute anymore. It's now $1,800 per ton of emitted methane. And oh crap, I guess we'll have to spend some money to go and clean up the mess we're making, because otherwise they're going to charge us even more than we would to clean it up. It just changes the economic balance. And because methane is so dangerous, we really want to stop that particular greenhouse gas.
There have been so many exciting discussions, even in the last few months, over policy and executive actions. And we've just gone, for the co-host of this show, 4 years of not having that. So it's really exciting. We're really excited.
Yeah, we're in a happy place.
I know, it's so much better. Well, last week, the American Jobs Plan was released. And we were talking before the show, we're talking about spending in the trillions of dollars. That gets the co-hosts of this podcast really, really excited. What role do you see infrastructure spending playing in the fight against climate change?
Well, it's going to be really important. And the Biden team has made clear that their infrastructure spending is, yes, of course, infrastructure, but it's also a vehicle for addressing the climate problems. Now, some of that is just kind of unpleasant stuff that has to be done, like we realize that our coasts are disappearing, and we're going to need to reboot along the coasts with infrastructure. I'm from Rhode Island. In Rhode Island, we have sewage treatment plants. You want things to run downhill to sewage treatment plants, so they're low, they're by the water, they're by the bay, and as the water rises, suddenly you have an unpredicted need to have to rebuild your entire sewage treatment system. So that kind of stuff, it's infrastructure, it's necessary, it's driven by climate, but the more powerful stuff, I think, is the stuff that's going to change the emissions output. And that's improvements in the grid, new transition lines, electric vehicle infrastructure, support for electric vehicle buyers to take advantage of the carbon-free nature of those vehicles, investment in additional solar and wind, and making sure that people are more able to put up residential solar. There's a whole part of the infrastructure allocation here that is designed not just to clean up after climate change and protect people from the harms, but to actually intervene and try to cut off some of the emissions.
Well, you're famous among these podcasters for your 279 consecutive weeks of speeches on climate change. I know you're really excited about the Biden administration. So when we look back 5 years from now, what will have made this term for the president a success when it comes to climate change?
Well, I think Build Back Better, the jobs bill, is going to be very significant. It is almost certainly going to be the biggest investment in climate remediation and infrastructure that the country's ever done. And the president wants that done by August. After August, we roll forward to November. November is the next conference of the parties, the home of the Paris Agreement, the famous legendary Paris Climate Accords. This is the update of that in Scotland, in Glasgow. And we have John Kerry, who's as passionate a person as I've ever come across on climate and oceans issues. And so teeing up to make sure that Glasgow basically blows the doors off of Paris and really is an inflection point for our dealing with this problem is a second huge opportunity. And then we're going to have another year plus after November in Congress with all three bodies controlled by Democrats, Senate, White House, and House of Representatives. So that gives us time to do yet more as we see to be necessary. But I think the running start that we get from the regulatory work that they're doing on their own, from the Build Back Better climate piece, and from the agreement that gets reached in Glasgow, positions us very, very well. And if we need to do more, that'll be great to do more. I think we do need to do more than what we're doing. But it's very nice, as you said, Brock, it's nice to have the feeling of progress and success, and things are starting to go our way. And so that's probably the best part of it.
And it's just nice to have real champions in the Senate who know what they're talking about. I mean, your explanation of methane, that was exceptional. So so happy to have a climate warrior in the Senate doing the good work and putting out great bills. So Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you again for joining the Climate Pod.
Thank you, Brock. Thank you, Ty. Appreciate being invited.